everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and
Hello.
together we are ThinkerThemer, and today we're doing another preview for you about an upcoming title from Thunderworks Games, who's the publisher of Cartographers, Role Player, Stone Spine Architects. This is their latest. It is Citizens of the Spark by Philip Dubarry. So as with all preview content, please remember that everything we talk about is subject to change. That could be the artwork, the graphic design, the rule set itself, but we're going to tell you everything we know so far about this game.
So in Citizens of the Spark, we are all leaders of brand new cities in a land where all the animals have become incredibly intelligent and also very skilled, because eons ago there was the transmission of a signal that brought the spark, which caused all of this. However, with that transmission, there was also a prophecy that one of these cities would outdo all the other cities, become so prosperous that it would become the shining jewel, and all the other cities would then crumble because everyone wants to go where, where the good stuff is happening. And so we want to make sure that that our city becomes that shining jewel. The way we're going to be doing this is by recruiting different citizens and activating all of those incredible abilities and using their smarts. The best way to get all that spark. Whoever has the most spark is the shining jewel and will be the winner of the game.
Well, I had no idea that was the theme, so I was smirking the whole way through that. But I did know that at the center of this game is the concept of the spark, and we are going to be collecting these sparks, and they're going to be the victory points in this game. So how does it play? Well, each player is building out a tableau of these different characters, but before we get there, we need to construct a deck that consists of between 7 and 10 different characters, depending on the player count in the game, from this very handy set of different citizens. And this catalog here, you can see that they're all given different names and they all have very different abilities. In the rule book, they give you 8 different pre-constructed decks, essentially, or recommended sets that are going to give you a different gameplay feel. But once we've constructed that deck, that's going to get shuffled up together. Each player is going to be given 2 that's going to start off their tableau, and then we're going to get into the gameplay. And the way that this works is that we're going to be drafting groups of citizens on our turn. And a group in this game is essentially a row in this grid that sits in the middle of the players, and it changes size again depending on the player count. But in a 2 and 3 player game, we have a grid that looks like this. So on my turn, I simply choose a row, and you can see that there are some sparks associated with some of the rows, because the ones that are not drafted are going to get sparks added to them to make them more attractive as the game goes on. So for example, I could take these 2 and then add them into my tableau, stacking like cards together and keeping these sparks as victory points on the side. The next part of my turn is the key part of this game. I get to choose one of these citizens to activate if I would like. And the way this activation works is that you choose one of the card types. For example, I have 2 of these ranches, so I might activate this stack. So you take the top one and you put it out in front of you as the lead player. And you say, I'm activating the rancher. And in this case, a rancher gives you points in your city according to the number of these types of symbols that you have. So right now I have 5 of these symbols, but more importantly, the level of points that I get is related to how many of that type of card that I have. So at the moment, I've got 2 ranchers, which means I'm going to get a level 2 benefit from this card. So when it says gain ? In your city, I'm gaining this level 2 benefit, which is 1 spark per symbol that I have here. So I would get 5 sparks as a result of taking this turn. Now, there are 2 things that are interesting about the choice here. 1, this card is now going to be discarded, leaving me with fewer ranches to activate next time, so I might want to build back up that character before activating it again. And 2, we now go into a secondary phase of a follow mechanic. So 1 by 1 in turn order, the players will get the option, the other players will get the option to activate a rancher if they have one. In this case, Maggie does not have a rancher in her tableau, so she can't activate it. And so there is this element of watching what other people have in their tableau as well, and whether they're going to be able to follow, because of course you have limited turns, just like any game, and the ideal situation is that you're also getting to do follow actions every time somebody leads with a card that you also have in your tableau. Now, of course, all of the cards in the tableau in the deck that you've pre-selected have very different powers. So some of them are going to give you points for collecting these symbols on cards. Others are going to allow you to discard cards. Others are going to allow you to convert cards, which is when you turn them upside down and then they act slightly differently in your tableau. There's also cards that are going to attack other players in some decks, and there are cards like this advisor here that are going to give me victory points at the end game if I've been able to achieve the objective on those cards. At the end of each player's turn, we simply refill the grid, and then we add sparks to the rows that weren't selected, and then it goes on to the next player, and we continue this way until we've gone all the way through the deck, at which point we add up all the extra points from our tableau, count up the ones we've collected along the way, and the person with the most sparks will win.
All right, to begin with, this game was actually on my list for my most anticipated games for Gen Con 2024, and probably the main reason for it was the artwork, because I didn't really know a lot about the game, and the artwork is just all these beautiful animals, illustrated animals by Diego Sa. Now, I just love the colorfulness of them, and there's so many different types as well that it's just like, it just draws me in, even with the cover. It just like,
It really does. I love the artwork as well, and each of the characters have a very distinct look that matches what they do as well. So the artwork tied in with the mechanics, and like the theme and the mechanics come together in terms of what the characters are actually doing. Is there a bigger thematic story here?
Well, you heard it originally,
it.
but in the actual gameplay, it very much just plays about the combination of the icons and the abilities for that particular game. I felt.
But I do want to talk about the main feeling that you get in this game, and that is the different styles of game depending on the way you've constructed the deck. So I guess a theme comes through in terms of when you put a cast of characters together that are all very aggressive and interactive, well, then you're going to have a game that feels really aggressive and interactive. And so they give you 8 recommended sets for combining different characters, and they've labeled those in the rulebook as well, which I really like, to tell you that this is a high interaction game, a low interaction game. This game focuses on conversion, like turning those characters
upside
over.
Down,
and there's I can't think of any other ones. There's a shorter game as well. So that's going to help you get through the deck faster. So there's lots of different combos, and then of course you can create your own as well. But I actually preferred, this is kind of interesting, because if you've been watching our channel, you'll know that we recently got into the Pokemon TCG, and TCG is all about constructing your own deck. But in a game like this, I really actually prefer that the publisher or the designer tell me how to combine that deck.
What are the experiences that you want me to have, kind of thing, as opposed to like, oh, did I break it? They actually do give you some rules as to, like, if you're constructing your own deck, just make sure, like, essentially follow these rules so that you don't create something that is unplayable potentially.
Yeah, and the game that we spent a lot of time playing, one of our gateway games, was Dominion, and this game gives you that same feeling of that discovery of what it feels like to put different characters together. So yes, it does change the overall feeling of the game, and for better or worse, it has you craving new experiences every time you sit down. So as we were playing this with our friends, we, every time we wanted to have like a really different experience. So we'd go from the low interaction to the high interaction, then we go back to a different type. And that's the fun in the experience, is like every time you play, you're looking at your cards being like, what is the best synergy of things here? Like, what should I be collecting together? Or how do I get this engine up and running that it's going to maximize the points that I can get? So if you're wired to think like that, like what is the best combo here, then I think you'll find this really satisfying. The one thing I'll say is that for us, when I mishmashed some characters together, they give you some loose rules on how to do that. But when we combined it together and I kind of let it free flow a bit, I found like the synergies between the cards weren't as satisfying, of course, because I wasn't like carefully trying to construct a deck. And so that meant that some cards were just like by themselves, not doing much at all. So I did prefer their recommended sets. But I think it's important to, when you think about a game like this, when it gives you that overall feeling of wanting new, when you play out all the characters and you've played this a ton like we have, you start wanting for more. And so they do have expansion content planned.
Yeah. I think there's going to be, I believe, potentially an expansion already in the making as part of the Kickstarter launch. Now, the other thing that I'll say is, like, as Amy said, this is going to feel the most fresh the first time that you play with these particular characters. Also, because you are learning what does this character do, and how do I game this character to actually get, use their abilities the best way possible. Once you kind of know that, then it becomes more around like, those combinations. So going, oh, wait a second, is the outcast in here? Oh, it is. Okay, so I have to now make sure that I use up. So it does sort of evolve, but I will definitely agree that then the more you kind of play it and you are experiencing the different ways that it plays, you eventually start kind of going, okay, well, now I want a different experience.
Yeah, so you either have to put the game away for a little bit until you've forgotten what all those combos are, get it back out again, and everything's fresh, which kind of is what happens to our one copy of Dominion that we have. But Dominion has a ton of expansions, and that's why, because people who play it a lot, they're going to want new cards. So I can see that headed in that direction in order to keep it fresh if you're playing this game a lot.
Now, in terms of also that follow mechanic, that's an interesting thing, because you're not only just playing your own game of going, oh, okay, what do I want to activate? And then there's also that tension of whatever I activate, I'm going to now start becoming like that type of citizen is going to be getting weaker in subsequent terms. But you have that follow mechanic of going, oh, it's not just about me. If I play my bandit, it means that someone else will also be able to trigger the bandit, which might completely
offset
change
your points.
Yeah, exactly. The points that I was going to get. And that may or may not have happened to me a couple of times.
This happened more than once to Maggie, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, you will know that Maggie is very head down, not very aware of what other players are doing, which sometimes works in those Euros where it's multiplayer solitaire. But in a game like this, you really do need to be thinking about, if a player activates the same card, what will happen to you? Or is it worth it because you might get 10 points, but they're going to get 15?
Yeah.
So it just offsets the points that you're making. So in a highly interactive version of this game where you've got mean cards in there, it was more than once that Maggie would activate a card which somebody else actually had a more powerful version of, because they had 3 and Maggie only had 2. And anything that she did to attack us suddenly came back straight away.
I mean, it's karma, so fair enough.
The karma got you immediately. And there's a really interesting, I quite like, even though it feels quite mean, and so that's something to think about. You can leave out the more aggressive cards, but there are cards that allow you to steal cards from other people's tableau. And so it also
give cards. So a lot of those cards that you don't want to have, you're gifting those cards, going, all of a sudden, here's some trash that I don't want.
But that suddenly makes the sequence really important, because I'm going to do something first and you're going to follow me. But if I steal the cards that you need to follow me, well, then you can't follow me. So you're thinking about, like, if I activate that, you're just like, interesting that
I do remember that it happened in a game.
It happened to you, I think.
Yeah, where I was like, oh, now I can follow because someone before me gets. So
gave you something.
I still did not win that game because Amy's amazing.
It's because Maggie doesn't look around.
Don't.
But anyway, so the follow mechanic is really interesting, particularly if you're someone who likes watching what other people are doing and thinking about that interactive element of the game.
Now let's talk about the player count. So what it feels like a different player count. So obviously it's a game where I felt like the scaling was pretty good. Like the actual experience of the game felt fairly similar, but obviously that the higher player counts, when you're activating something, there's more people activating. So there's going to be more things that are going to be changing the state of yours and other people's tableaus just within that one game.
Yeah, I like that dynamic more, because the follow becomes more interesting. There's more people, and a lot of the cards have elements on them where it's like every opponent who has fewer symbols than you has to, to give you something. And so that's more interesting because there's just more interactions with more people. So this is going to shine at a higher player count, but it's perfectly fine to check it out at the lower player counts.
Yeah, it felt actually very satisfying at a 2-player count. It plays sort of very well as well.
Yeah, and fairly quickly.
Yeah. I'll talk about the solo. It does come with a solo mode. Now, the solo mode introduces this character, Tintilla, which essentially just you create the deck the same way that you would with a two-player game, but all of a sudden you're kind of bringing in this external player. I think the order of it is like this, and so Chinchilla's going to be creating a conveyor belt of their tableau over here. So their characters are essentially, I'm just going to grab a whole handful of them and see what happens. So they would have, they were just going to be creating them like that. So that's going to then become like essentially row 1, row 2, and then 3, and then any excess that doesn't have a double up is just going to continue this way. The way it works is it actually has its own deck of cards that has the like standard cards that will go into every single game that you have, and then depending on the characters that you bring in, it has specific cards that you would add in for those characters, so that obviously the actions that it does will make sense with those characters. So all that would happen is obviously you'd shuffle this deck, and then it would show you what row during Chinchilla's turn, which row is going to be taking or activating. So obviously it's because of the color. So in this instance, this is the group that is going to be taking. Now, there's several things that happen because it's taking these cards, which then are going to go into its tableau. It's also going to be activating essentially that card, but it's not going to be activating its ability. It's going to be activating the ability that it has on this card. So you're not actually, so you're essentially replacing that for this, but whatever card it's activating, you get to follow. So that card is the one that I would get to follow as part of that turn. Now, it can also follow you. So whenever it's following you, for example, if I were to play, what do I have that it has? The Bandit. So if I play the Bandit, it can follow me as well. So the way it works is, say I play it, it's going to follow, meaning it's going to spend that card, it's going to activate. The activation is just points. So there's a little cheat sheet that tells you, depending on how many cards it had, so it had technically a level 2, it's going to get 5 points. If you want to make it harder, then it's just going to be more points. It's going to get more points for each one of those levels of activation. So it's going to be losing that card, but then every time one of these cards activates, it goes back to the back of its conveyor belt, and everything else sort of moves forward. So I find it, academically speaking, quite an intriguing solo mode or automat to facilitate. But there is, as you saw, a fair bit of facilitation, because there's an element of facilitation when I play my turn, because I have to check, oh, okay, so does Chinchilla activate? And if they activate, then, their conveyor belt will move as well. And then now I'm going over to Chinchilla's turn. What's the card? What's the row that's going to be cleared? Are they, what's the action that's activating? Do I want to follow? So there's a lot more going on, which my tiny little brain that can't even pay attention to what other players are doing, it's just too much. So even though it's quite an intriguing mechanism as an automa, and I think a lot of people will really dig that, because it's almost like its own little mechanical thing. It's not really the kind of game that I would play as a solo. I will say also, I felt like the experience, because their actions are kind of different to the ones that are on the cards, even though they're matching those characters, the games felt different to playing the same set of cards multiplayer.
Yeah, because when you're looking at an opponent's tableau, you know what that card does, and if I activate it, they're going to get the same benefit. But this seems like different to that. But it's kind of interesting.
It's very
interesting. Like the way that it's bringing in new cards. So it's like having an opponent with a slightly different or an evolving or dynamic tableau.
Yes.
So I can see why they did that. But I think it sounds like even though it's a bit of facilitation, it seems very smooth to implement.
It's I don't know if I would say it didn't feel, it's not that it's smooth for me, just because there's so many steps. It's more that it'll become more, it'll get smoother the longer you play it, because you start getting used to that flow.
Yes.
I just found it fascinating as its own mechanical conveyor belt that you're facilitating. So it just felt like it's a good way of exploring the cards and getting to know, what are the abilities of all the different cards, but it's not really replicating what that deck would feel like multiplayer. It's sort of just another way of exploring the game in a way. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we hope you enjoyed this preview and it gave you the information that you need to decide whether this game is for you or not. We would probably recommend it to you if you really enjoy that card combo feel, if you enjoy creating a customized deck for your friends to play with, you're that kind of gamer, or if you're simply looking for a Gateway Plus style game of similar weight to Dominion. So We hope this was useful. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.